I think you need a hug. Can I hug you? The words were soft but clear. They broke the cold, quiet air of Central Park like a tiny bell ringing. Alistair Croft turned his head slowly. He had been lost in his thoughts, like he was in a thick fog. A little black girl stood in front of him. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, and she was missing one mitten. She wore a big knitted hat that covered most of her hair. Her wide, steady eyes looked straight at him. "What did you say?" Alistair asked. "You look like you need a hug," the little girl said like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Alistair blinked in surprise. He wasn't used to strangers talking to him, especially not children. Lately, his life felt very small. Just work, lonely dinners, and nights full of grief. "I'm Zora," the girl said proudly, shifting her boots in the snow. "My mommy says hugs don't fix everything, but they help." Alistair let out a small laugh. "That's pretty smart." "I'm 5, Zora said, standing tall, "and a half." Alistair smiled for the first time in a long while. "Well, thank you for the offer, Zora." Zora looked down at her wrist. She wore a colorful bracelet made of yarn and tiny beads. She took it off and held it out to Alistair. "You should wear this," she said. "It helps me when I'm sad." Alistair froze. The bracelet looked special, handmade, and a little frayed. "I couldn't," he said softly. "It's okay," Zora interrupted gently. "I can make another one." Alistair carefully took it from her. She reached out, slid it up over his glove and onto his wrist. It looked odd against his fancy overcoat and expensive watch, but it felt right. "I'm Alistair," he said softly. "It's nice to meet you, Zora." She smiled brightly. "Want to meet my mommy? She's right over there." Zora pointed to a bench nearby. A woman sat there, wrapped in a thick coat. Her sharp eyes followed Zora closely, like a hawk watching its chick. A paper bag full of groceries sat at her feet. She looked tired but strong. "Come on," Zora said, grabbing Alistair's hand. "She's nice. You'll like her." Alistair let her lead him. It was strange, a powerful CEO being led through a snowy park by a little 5-year-old. But Zora's presence felt warm, like sunlight breaking through winter clouds. When they got closer, the woman stood up. She looked at Alistair politely but with caution. "Zora," she said firmly, "we've talked about wandering off." "I didn't go far, Mommy," Zora said. He looked like he needed someone. The woman's eyes landed on Alistair. "I'm sorry about her being so forward." "It's all right," Alistair said softly. "She's something special." The woman nodded. "I'm Alara. Thank you for not being, a threat." Alistair gave her a small smile. "Of course." Alara's eyes flicked to the bracelet on his wrist, then back to him. "She only gives those when she really means it." "I figured," Alistair said, glancing at it. "I'm honored." They stood quietly for a moment until Alara gestured to the bench. "Would you like some coffee? It's instant, but it's warm." Alistair nodded, and they sat. Alara poured coffee from a worn thermos. It tasted a little burnt and too sweet, but it was comforting. Zora snuggled between them, sipping cocoa from a small cup, looking content. "You're not from around here," Alara said. "I live just a few blocks away, Upper West Side." Alistair replied. Her eyebrows raised a little. "You don't seem like the park bench type." "Not usually," Alistair admitted. "Today is an exception." "Anniversary?" Alara guessed softly. Alistair blinked at her. "Excuse me? You've got that look," she said gently, like someone remembering something that hurts that her hesitated. 3 years ago, I lost my wife and son. A car accident." Alara froze, her breath catching in the cold air. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I think I treated them." Alistair looked at her in confusion. "I used to work at St. Luke's Emergency Care," Alara said. "I was on shift the night of a crash. A mom and her son came in, both critical. The woman wore a chain with a locket, pictures inside." Alistair's stomach dropped. "A silver chain with a gold clasp?" "Yes," Alara whispered. "That was her," Alistair said, his voice tight. Alara swallowed. "I didn't know you were her husband. It was chaos. I stayed with her as long as I could." Alistair's throat tightened. "Thank you." Alara looked away quickly, blinking back tears. "I'm sorry we couldn't do more." You stayed, Alistair said quietly. That means more than you know. The moment hung between them. The air felt heavy but full of meaning. They sat quietly for a while. Zora rested her head on her mom's shoulder, her eyelids drooping. I used to be in nursing school, Alara said softly. Had to leave when Zora came, still hoping to finish one day. You should, Alistair said, glancing at Zora and then back at Alara. You're meant to help people. Alara gave a tired smile. Helping doesn't pay the rent. Alistair looked down at the bracelet on his wrist. The simple beads and yarn suddenly felt heavy, like a promise. I'll be around, he said as he stood up. Alara studied him. We're usually here around this time. Alistair nodded, then looked at Zora. Thank you for the bracelet. Keep it, she said sleepily, until you're not sad anymore. As Alistair walked through the snow, the cold felt a little less sharp. He didn't smile, but something inside him shifted. For the first time in years, he felt a fragile thread of healing, woven by a little girl's hands. The next morning, Alistair stood in front of his bathroom mirror. He was fully dressed in a charcoal suit and a pale blue tie, but his eyes were on the colorful bracelet still snug around his wrist. He tried to take it off twice, but each time his fingers touched the frayed yarn, he froze. It felt like taking it off would break something fragile inside him. He left it on. Alistair's penthouse overlooked the city skyline. Tall glass buildings shone like monuments to ambition. But inside, his home was silent. No laughter, no warmth. Breakfast sat untouched on the counter. Scrambled eggs and grapefruit, the same breakfast he used to make for his son before school. He hadn't cooked like that in years. Alistair pushed the plate away and checked the time. It was too early to visit the park, but he grabbed his overcoat anyway. Without thinking, he slid his hands into leather gloves and left. By 9:30, Central Park was covered in a fresh layer of snow. He walked to the same bench. It was empty. Alistair sat down, looking at the bright beads of Zora's bracelet. He stayed there for nearly an hour before leaving. That afternoon, during a board meeting, he noticed a coworker glance at his wrist. New accessory, Mr. Croft? The man joked. Looks cheerful. Alistair said nothing. The man chuckled nervously and went back to his presentation. But Alistair couldn't stop touching the bracelet under the table. It reminded him of something simple. Not charity, but connection. Humanity. That same time the next day, Alistair returned to the park. Alara and Zora were there. Alara sat on the same bench, reading a worn paperback. Zora crouched by a pile of breadcrumbs, feeding pigeons with great focus. Alistair hesitated, then walked over. Hey, he said gently. Zora's face lit up. Mr. Alistair. She ran to him, wrapping her little arms around his waist. Alara looked up, surprised. Well, she said, brushing off her coat, I guess you're a regular now. I suppose I am, Alistair said with a small smile. You kept the bracelet, Alara said softly. Alistair lifted his wrist. I tried to take it off. Couldn't. Told you it helps, Zora said proudly. Alara chuckled. She thinks her crafts are magic. They might be, Alistair said. It's been a long time since someone gave me something just because they wanted to. Alara studied him. You're not here by accident, are you? No, Alistair admitted. I'm not. She nodded slowly. Well, you're welcome to sit. Coffee? Please, Alistair said. They passed the thermos again. Zora curled up between them, drinking cocoa. Zora was born at Roosevelt? Alara said softly. I was 24. Her dad left before she could talk. Alistair didn't flinch. I'm sorry. I'm not, Alara said. It was hard, but it taught me what love really means. The kind that stays. The kind you build on. Alistair nodded thoughtfully. She was a quiet baby, Alara said, smiling. But not anymore. Now she's pure energy, always asking questions. She asked me yesterday if people could stop being sad, Alistair said. I didn't know how to answer. Alara looked at him carefully. And today, Alistair added softly, I still don't know, but I want to find out. They sat quietly. Then Alistair turned to Zora. Do you come here every day? Not Sundays. That's library day, she said proudly. I love books. Me too, Alistair said. What's your favorite? Harold and the Purple Crayon, Zora said quickly. He draws his own world. Alistair smiled. That's a good one. The wind picked up. Alara pulled Zora's coat tighter. She glanced at Alistair, then at the nearby playground. Want to take her over for a bit? Alara asked. I'll pack up our things. Alistair hesitated, but Zora was already pulling his hand. Come on! I'll show you the twisty slide! The playground was almost empty. Alistair helped Zora climb the ladder. She looked down at him, smiling brightly. Watch me, she said, sliding down with a puff of snow. Alistair laughed, really laughed. It felt strange but wonderful. Again, she squealed. By the time they returned, Zora's cheeks were glowing pink. Alara smiled softly. She doesn't warm up to people this fast. She's hard not to like, Alistair said. They packed their things. Alistair offered to walk them home, but Alara shook her head. We're fine. You've already done enough. I'll see you again, Alistair said to Zora. You'd better, she said with mock sternness. Alara smiled. Same time tomorrow? Same time, Alistair promised. That night, in his quiet penthouse, Alistair took out a photo of his wife and son. He placed it on the mantel and whispered, I met someone today. 2 someones. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was drifting. The next few days followed a new rhythm. Each afternoon, Alistair went to the park. Alara and Zora were always there, smiling in a way that felt real. Alistair felt like he was finally part of something, not business deals or contracts, but something human. One afternoon, as spring teased the air, Zora handed him a new bracelet. This one was bright yellow and green. Wear it with the first one, she insisted. Alistair obeyed. His wrist now carried 2 colorful bracelets, a patchwork of joy he wore into every boardroom. You don't hide them, Alara noticed. I don't want to, Alistair said. She smiled softly. Most people do. I spent years hiding pain, Alistair said quietly. I think I owe it to myself to show what's healing me. That's brave, Alara said. Alistair looked at her. I think surviving quietly is braver. She didn't answer, but her silence was full of meaning. Later, Alara said, I saw your photo yesterday, in the paper. Alistair Croft, CEO of Hall Capital. Alistair nodded. Most people know the company, few know the man. She studied him. You didn't tell me. Would it have mattered? He asked. No, Alara said firmly, but it explains the suit. They both laughed, and for a moment the air felt easier to breathe. Then Alara's smile faded a little. I looked up the car crash, she said softly. Alistair sat very still. Alara's voice was gentle. I wanted to be sure. That night in the ER, I didn't know who I was treating, she said, but I remember your wife and your son. Alistair didn't speak. Alara kept going. She had a wedding ring on her finger, Alara whispered. There were words carved inside. I remember tracing them with my thumb because we couldn't find her ID. Alistair looked up at her, his voice breaking. It was engraved with the words, Forever still isn't long enough. Alara nodded slowly. Yes. The air grew quiet. Not awkward or heavy, but soft, like a special moment they both understood. Alara whispered, I stayed with her, until she passed away. I thought someone should. Alistair's voice cracked. Thank you. Alara's eyes filled with tears. I've never told anyone that before. They sat in silence for a while. The breeze gently moved Alara's coat. From the playground nearby, Zora's happy laughter floated over. Alara spoke softly. She was kind and scared, but peaceful. Alistair closed his eyes and swallowed hard. She was the best person I ever knew. Alara reached out, hesitated, then gently placed her hand on his. They sat like that for a long time. A week later, Alistair invited Alara and Zora to lunch at a little corner cafe on Columbus Avenue. It wasn't fancy. It was just a cozy diner with black and white checkered floors, and the waitresses knew all the regular customers by name. Zora happily ate grilled cheese with tomato soup. Alara only ordered coffee and a simple club sandwich because she didn't want to spend too much. Alistair watched them quietly. The world used to feel cold and empty to him, but now it was full of life and warmth. Zora giggled as she floated crackers in her soup. Alara held her cup with both hands like she needed to feel its warmth. There was something unspoken, a gentle connection between them all. As they walked home after lunch, Zora skipped between them. Alistair turned to Alara. Do you want to go back to nursing school? Alara looked at him in surprise. I think about it every day, she admitted. What stops you? He asked. She sighed. Tuition, time, and the fear that I'm too far behind. You're not too far behind, Alistair said firmly. Alara shook her head. I wouldn't feel right taking help. This isn't charity, Alistair replied softly. It's an investment in someone who stayed, someone who was there when it mattered most. Alara's eyes met his. You don't have to do this. I know, Alistair said. Zora, not paying attention to their serious talk, tugged his hand. Can we get hot chocolate? Alistair smiled. Only if we get extra marshmallows. That night, Alistair sat in his big penthouse apartment by the fire. He didn't turn on the TV. Instead, he opened a drawer and pulled out an old journal his wife used to write in. He hadn't opened it since the accident. The pages were yellow and a little worn. There were grocery lists, sketches of birthday parties, and little doodles of their son's messy curls. Then he found a note he'd forgotten. It was in her handwriting. If something happens to me, don't close off. Please let someone in. Even if it's not like us, it could still be something good. Alistair sat staring at those words for a long time. Then he placed the note next to their family photo on the fireplace mantel. He touched the two colorful yarn bracelets on his wrist, the ones Zora had given him. They were old but strong, just like him. The past would never go away, but maybe it didn't have to weigh him down anymore. Maybe it could walk beside him. The next Saturday, the sky over Manhattan was gray and heavy with the promise of snow. Alistair stood outside a small neighborhood market near Alara and Zora's shelter, holding a modest bag of groceries. He hadn't told them he was coming. He just wanted to surprise them with kindness. Inside the bag, there were fresh apples, a small block of cheddar cheese, a loaf of sourdough bread, a box of herbal tea, and Zora's favorite, colorful marshmallow cereal. It wasn't much, but it was thoughtful. He found them sitting on the same bench near the playground swings. Alara was reading a book, her hair tucked under a knit cap, her shoulders braced against the cold. Zora was counting pigeons and tossing bits of bagel to them. Afternoon, Alistair called out. Zora turned and shouted happily, Mr. Alistair! She ran into his arms. Alara looked up, surprised, then smiled warmly. You found us on a Saturday. I had a feeling you'd be here, Alistair said, kneeling to hug Zora. Alara brushed snow off her coat. We don't usually stay out long on weekends. The shelter opens late and gets crowded fast. Alistair handed her the grocery bag. Just a few things. Thought you might like something different tonight. Alara looked down at the bag, hesitating. You didn't have to do this. I know, Alistair said softly. Zora peeked into the bag and squealed, Marshmallow stars! Alara looked at Alistair, her expression softening. You remembered. Some things are worth remembering, Alistair said with a smile. They sat together sipping coffee from a thermos Alistair had brought. Zora built little snow castles nearby, pretending they were homes for invisible princesses. She's the reason I'm still standing, Alara said suddenly. Alistair turned to her. After I dropped out of school, there were days I didn't think I could make it, she whispered. No degree, no safety net, just me and her. But every time she smiled, I knew I had to keep going. You did more than just try, Alistair said softly. You stayed. Alara looked at her gloved hands. That's the hardest part, showing up again and again, even when no one's watching. Alistair nodded. That's the rarest kind of love. Zora ran over, out of breath. Mr. Alistair, can I show you something? Of course, he said. She pulled out a piece of folded paper and handed it to him. Inside was a crayon drawing of 3 people holding hands under a big sun. One had brown hair and a blue suit. It was Alistair. Another had black curls and a purple dress. That was Alara. The smallest one had 2 bracelets and a huge smile. That was Zora. That's me, Zora said proudly, and Mommy, and you. Alistair stared at the drawing, touched. You're quite the artist. I made it for you, she said. He folded it carefully and put it in his coat pocket. Then I'll keep it close. Alara glanced at her watch. We should get back. It's almost shelter dinner time. I'll walk you there, Alistair offered. The shelter was 2 blocks away, tucked between an old laundromat and a tax office. The brick walls were faded and the inside buzzed with tired voices. People sat quietly, waiting for meals that were more about warmth than taste. Alara signed in while Zora clung to Alistair's coat. Suddenly, she looked up at him. Do you ever get scared? Alistair knelt down. Sometimes, but being scared isn't the same as being alone. Zora nodded thoughtfully. I feel better when you're with us. Alistair didn't know what to say, so he squeezed her little hand. At the door, Alara stopped. Thank you for today. For caring. Alistair smiled. It's not an effort. It's a choice I want to keep making. That night, Alistair pinned Zora's drawing above his fireplace next to his family photo. He stood there looking at both for a long time. The following week, Alistair made a quiet plan. He called a friend at a community college, asked about the nursing program, and arranged a scholarship in Alara's name, paid in full for 2 semesters. It wasn't charity. It was helping someone finish what she had to give up before. When he saw Alara next, she looked tired but lighter. I got a call, she said, her voice shaky. From Westboro College. They said someone set up a scholarship for me. It covers everything. Alistair smiled. That's amazing. Alara narrowed her eyes playfully. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? I might know someone who knows someone, Alistair teased. Alara laughed softly. You're impossible. I'm persistent, Alistair said with a grin. Zora tugged on his sleeve. Does this mean Mommy gets to be Nurse Alara again? Yes, Alara said, tears filling her eyes. It does. Alistair knelt down to Zora's level. Your mommy is going to be the best nurse this city has ever seen. Zora grinned. Can I be her assistant? Alara looked at her daughter and smiled. Sweetheart, you already are. That night, Alistair walked home through softly falling snow. The streetlights made the city glow. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was walking back into an empty home. He was walking towards something new, something real, something good, something that started with a bracelet and a hug. On a rainy Thursday morning, Alistair arrived at Croft Capital's office. He looked sharp in his suit, but there was a new warmth about him. People noticed the colorful yarn bracelets still on his wrist. His assistant, Linnea, hurried over. Board meeting at 10, lunch with the Cargill investors at noon, and your brother called twice about the foundation dinner next week. Reschedule lunch, Alistair said calmly. Linnea blinked. Sir, I'll go to the board meeting, then I need the afternoon off. May I ask why? Alistair smiled faintly. Because I promised someone I'd be at the school office by 1:30. Linnea nodded slowly, surprised by the change in him. Later, Alistair stood outside the local elementary school. Alara had called last night. Her nursing orientation clashed with Zora's school conference. Could Alistair go in her place? He'd said yes without hesitation. Inside, Zora's smile brightened his whole day. You came, she said, grabbing his hand. Of course I did, Alistair said warmly. They met Zora's teacher, Mrs. Polk, a kind woman with glasses. She smiled at Alistair. Zora is an incredible child, bright, curious, and so kind. She helps other shy kids feel safe. Alistair felt proud. That sounds like her. Mrs. Polk grew serious. But she's been afraid at night. She dreams her mother disappears. She wakes up crying sometimes. Alistair felt a pang of sadness. He thanked Mrs. Polk and left with Zora. On the walk home, he didn't bring up the dreams. Instead, he asked about her favorite books, drawings, and lunch. Zora chattered happily. That evening, Alistair met Alara outside the shelter. She looked tired but excited. How was orientation? He asked. Exciting, she said with a soft smile. Overwhelming. but it feels right. She's doing great in school, Alistair said, but she's been having some hard dreams. Alara's face softened. I know, she clings to me at night. You're doing everything right, Alistair said gently. They walked together in silence for a while. Then Alara stopped. You didn't have to go to that conference. You have a company to run. Alistair smiled. That company runs itself most days. Zora doesn't. Alara laughed quietly. Still, thank you. I never expected all this. Alistair looked at her kindly. I meant it when I said this isn't charity. I know, Alara whispered, but it's still more than I ever dreamed of. Alistair looked at Alara and spoke softly. Have you ever thought about leaving the shelter? Alara stared at him with tired eyes. I'm not saying anything crazy, Alistair said carefully. Just a safe place for now. I own a small apartment near the park. It's empty, safe, and already has furniture. You won't owe me anything. No rules, no strings. Alara crossed her arms. Do you realize how this sounds? Yes, Alistair said with a little smile. That's why I'm saying it carefully. You and Zora deserve peace. She deserves a door that locks at night. It's just an offer. Alara studied him for a long moment, then finally nodded. Let me think about it. Of course, Alistair said gently. That night, Alistair returned to his fancy penthouse apartment. He made himself a cup of warm chamomile tea and sat by the window looking out at the sparkling city lights. But his thoughts weren't about his company or Wall Street deals. They were about Alara and Zora, who had quietly become very important to him. He thought of Alara's calm strength and Zora's bright laugh. He remembered something his late wife once wrote in her journal. Real love is never loud. It listens. It shows up. That's what Alistair was doing now, showing up. And for the first time in his life, that felt like enough. When Alistair finally gave Alara the keys the following Tuesday, they felt heavier than they should have. Just two small keys, one for the door and one for the mailbox. But to Alistair, handing them to Alara felt like giving her a piece of solid ground after years of drifting. They stood outside the apartment building on 86th Street. The area was quiet, with brownstone houses and a little shop nearby with a fading sign. The apartment had been owned by Alistair's company for years and was used for visiting workers. It wasn't fancy, but it was safe and freshly painted. Alara looked at the keys, then at Alistair. Are you sure? I've never been more sure, Alistair said. Alara glanced at Zora, who clutched her stuffed toy, bouncing on her toes with excitement. Want to see your new home? Alistair asked, kneeling down to Zora's level. Can I pick my bed? Zora asked with sparkling eyes. Alara chuckled softly. There's only one bed, sweetie. Then we'll share, Zora said happily. They climbed the stairs quietly. Alistair opened the door to a small but cozy apartment. It had one bedroom, a small living room, a tiny kitchen, and a bright bathroom. A vase of yellow tulips sat on the table. Zora ran in, her boots leaving tiny prints on the wooden floor, and jumped onto the futon with a giggle. Alara walked in slowly, looking around carefully, almost as if she couldn't believe it was real. You can stay here as long as you need, Alistair said gently. There's no time limit. Alara took a deep breath. This feels like too much. You've given me more than you realize, Alara, Alistair said softly. This is just balance. She turned to him, whispering, I didn't think people like you, people in your world, did things like this. I didn't either, Alistair said, honestly. Alara gave a faint smile and said, We'll take care of it. Keep it clean. Be good tenants. You already are, Alistair said. Later that evening, Alistair returned with pizza from their favorite shop and a bag of simple groceries. They sat on the floor eating from paper plates, laughing when Zora dropped a slice of pepperoni on her shirt and tried to blame the couch. Alara poured sparkling water into chipped mugs Alistair found in the cupboard. To new beginnings, Alara said, raising her mug. Alistair lifted his. To safe spaces. Zora clinked her cup loudly. To extra cheese. As the night grew dark, Alistair helped unpack blankets, books, and a secondhand lamp he'd brought from his storage. When he finally stood to leave, Zora ran to him and hugged him tightly around the waist like she'd done it 100 times before. "Are you coming tomorrow?" she asked. "Every day you'll have me," Alistair promised. Alara walked him to the door. "You know, what you're doing isn't just helping me, it's changing her whole world." "She changed mine first," Alistair said with a soft smile. As he left, Alara watched him disappear down the hall, her hand closing around the keys in her pocket. The next week felt like something fragile learning to fly. Alistair visited every day, sometimes to bring groceries, sometimes to help Zora with homework, and sometimes just to sit with Alara quietly in the evening light. One night, Alara opened up more than she ever had. "I had postpartum depression," she whispered. "After Zora was born, I didn't tell anyone, not even the nurses. I thought I had to be strong. I used to walk her at night because she wouldn't sleep. I'd hold her for hours. Sometimes I cried more than she did. I loved her so much, it scared me." Alistair nodded gently. "Grief is like that too, loving so much there's no room for anything else." Alara looked at him. The room filled with quiet understanding. They didn't need words. Two hearts that had been hurt were learning how to heal. But one rainy Thursday, that peace was broken. Alistair was in a meeting when his phone buzzed. It was Alara. "Can you come? It's urgent," she said, her voice shaking. "What happened?" Alistair asked, standing up quickly. "The shelter manager showed up. They followed us after school. They said if I didn't come back right now, they'd call social services." Alistair's chest tightened. "They can't do that," he said firmly, rushing to his car. "You haven't done anything wrong. Zora's safe and happy. They said I broke the rules, that I endangered her," Alara whispered. "They're trying to scare you," Alistair said, his voice hard. "I'll handle it." When he arrived, Alara was pacing while Zora sat curled up on the couch, looking scared. Alistair took Alara aside. "You did nothing wrong," he said. "You moved into legal housing. You protected your daughter." "But they have paperwork," Alara said with tears in her eyes. "They have rules." Alistair looked at her firmly. "Then we'll fight with ours." That night, Alistair made 3 calls, one to his lawyer, one to a trusted social worker, and one to a court worker. By morning, the threats had stopped, but something had changed. Alara no longer felt invisible, and Alistair, for the first time since he gave her those keys, felt pure anger. Not at her, but at the system that treated her like she was wrong for protecting her child. The next day, Alistair stood in the mirrored elevator of his company, his reflection calm but full of quiet rage. He had built empires and made billion-dollar deals, but nothing had ever made him so angry. They had scared Alara and used Zora to do it. When he stepped into his office, his assistant Linnea looked up. "Everything okay, sir?" "I need the best family attorney in the city. Someone who won't back down," Alistair said firmly. Linnea nodded. "I'll make it happen." A few hours later, Alistair was sitting across from Sloane Abbott, a lawyer known for fighting unfair custody cases. She listened as Alistair told Alara's story. "She's living in a safe apartment, right?" Sloane asked. "Yes," Alistair said. "And the shelter is threatening her for leaving?" "Yes," Alistair replied. Sloane sighed. "Typical. They don't want to lose numbers. It's not about safety. It's about money and paperwork." Alistair's jaw tightened. "I can file something to protect her," Sloane said, "but I'll need her whole story, every detail." "She'll tell you," Alistair said. "She's strong." "I'm sure she is," Sloane said, "but strength doesn't protect you when you're a single black mother in a broken system." Alistair's silence spoke volumes. That evening, Alistair knocked on Alara's door with Sloane beside him. Alara opened the door, wearing a soft gray sweater. The smell of rice and garlic filled the apartment. "You're early," she said. "I brought someone," Alistair said, stepping aside. Alara's eyes flickered with hesitation. "This is Sloane Abbott," Alistair said. "She's a top lawyer. I asked her to help." "I didn't ask for legal help," Alara said quietly. "I know, but you need it," Alistair said. Sloane stepped forward. Miss Alvarez, I understand the shelter is trying to scare you. I've seen this before. We can fight back, but I need your full story. Alara glanced at Zora, who was coloring happily at the table. I don't want Zora dragged into this, she whispered. She won't be, Sloane said firmly, not if we do this right. They sat at the table while Alistair poured tea. Zora was sent to her room with promises of a bedtime story later. Then Alara began to talk. She told them about the eviction, the shelter, the curfews, and the crying strangers. She described how no one cared, how she felt invisible, and how the first night in this apartment felt like real peace. By the end, Sloane's face was hard. I've seen hundreds of cases, she said, but this is unacceptable. Alara's voice shook. They made me feel like a criminal, like wanting more for my daughter was selfish. It's not selfish, Alistair said firmly. It's the bravest thing there is. Sloane stood. I'll file tomorrow. We'll request a hearing. If they push, I'll push harder. After Sloane left, Alara turned to Alistair. I don't know how to thank you for this. You don't have to, Alistair said. You're not alone anymore. Alara's eyes filled with tears. When Zora told me she dreamed you disappeared, Alistair said softly, I knew I couldn't stand by. Alara reached for his hand. Later that night, they sat quietly as the city hummed outside. Alara pulled out an old photo of herself with baby Zora. She saved me, Alara whispered. I didn't know how much I wanted to live until I saw her face. Alistair leaned back. I didn't know how much I wanted to feel again until I met you both. Alara looked at him. Do you think your wife would understand all this? Alistair was quiet for a long moment. She once wrote me a note. She said if anything happened to her, I shouldn't close myself off. She told me to let something good in, even if it looked different. Alara smiled softly. She knew you well. She always did, Alistair whispered. Alara stood. I should get some sleep. Tomorrow's a big day. You're not alone in it, Alistair said gently. Alara smiled at him from her bedroom door. Neither are you. And for the first time since the shelter tried to take away their peace, something stronger settled in its place. Hope and a new kind of family, built on love, not blood. The courthouse stood like a big gray building on Center Street. It looked serious and quiet in the early morning light. Inside, the shiny marble floors echoed with the sound of people walking quickly and whispering softly. The air felt heavy, like something important was about to happen. Alistair stood near the entrance, wearing a simple navy blue suit. It wasn't his usual fancy work clothes. He wanted to look kind and calm, not powerful. Next to him, Alara walked back and forth nervously. She held a folder close to her chest. Inside that folder was her whole story, everything she wanted to tell the judge. Zora, her little girl, wasn't there. She was with a kind neighbor from their apartment building, promised a fun day of cartoons and coloring books. Alistair had insisted Zora stay home. Today wasn't a day for a child to be in court. Sloane Klein, Alara's lawyer, arrived just before the hearing started. Sloane's face was calm, but her eyes were sharp, like she was ready for a fight. I talked to the clerk, Sloane said. Judge Theodora is in charge today. She's fair and doesn't like drama. She only cares about facts. Alara took a deep breath. Do we even have a chance? She whispered. Sloane looked Alara in the eyes. We don't just have a chance, she said. We have the truth. In courtroom 4B, the bright fluorescent lights buzzed softly as the hearing began. On one side of the room, a worker from the shelter sat behind a pile of papers. His face was serious. He spoke in a cold, business-like way. Alara Alvarez left her assigned shelter without telling us first, he said. That breaks the rules. She moved without permission, and that is not allowed. He didn't care that Alara had moved to a safer place. All that mattered to him was that she didn't follow the shelter's rules. Sloane stood up calmly. Your Honor, she said, Alara Alvarez did not abandon the shelter. She moved into safe, private housing. No one forced her to leave, and she paid nothing. She also told the shelter about the move within 2 days. She is not careless. She is being punished for taking care of her child. Judge Theodora, a woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, looked through the documents. "Does Miss Alvarez have a child?" she asked. "Yes," Sloane said. "A 7-year-old named Zora. She's safe, doing well in school, and healthy. She lives in a secure home now." The judge turned to Alara. "Miss Alvarez, why didn't you ask for permission before leaving?" Alara stood up slowly. Her voice shook, but she spoke clearly. "Because asking for permission takes weeks, sometimes months," she said. "There were roaches in the shelter kitchen. People were fighting in the hallways. My daughter was scared every single night. When I was offered a clean and safe place, I took it. I wasn't going to wait to protect her." The judge stayed quiet for a moment. Then she asked the shelter worker, "Did you ever report Zora missing? Did anyone ask for a welfare check?" "No, Your Honor," the man said quietly. "But the protocol." "Protocol is not law," Judge Theodora interrupted firmly. A soft murmur spread through the courtroom. Alistair sat still, his chest swelling with pride. He looked at Alara and realized she wasn't weak like she thought she was. She was strong, brave, and full of grace. After listening to more arguments, the judge leaned back in her chair. "I've read all the statements and testimonies," she said. "I see no proof of neglect or danger. Miss Alvarez acted to protect her child. This court will not punish her for that." Alara gasped softly. "Furthermore," the judge added, "this court orders that no shelter or agency may contact or harass Miss Alvarez or her daughter without a judge's permission." For the first time that day, Sloane smiled. Alara covered her mouth with her hands, tears filling her eyes. Alistair closed his eyes and took a deep breath, relief washing over him. When they stepped up outside into the sunlight, Alara looked around like she was seeing the city for the first time. "I can breathe," she whispered. "You've earned that breath," Sloane said gently. Alistair turned to Sloane. "Thank you," he said. "Truly." Sloane nodded. "You believed her. That's more than most people ever do." As Sloane walked away, Alara turned to Alistair. "I didn't think we'd win." "You didn't just win," Alistair said. "You proved that the system doesn't get to decide what's right." Alara's eyes were wet with tears. "This wouldn't have happened without you." Alistair took her hand gently. "And none of it matters without you." They walked slowly down the courthouse steps, the warm sun shining on their faces. A taxi honked in the distance. Pigeons flew overhead. Alara stopped halfway down the steps. "Do you ever feel like your life split in half?" she asked. Alistair nodded. "Before and after the worst day." "Me too," she whispered. "But now," he said softly, "I think I'm finally seeing the bridge between those halves." They shared a quiet smile, understanding each other without words. Back at the apartment, Zora ran straight into her mother's arms. Then she turned to Alistair. "Did the judge wear a robe?" she asked excitedly. "She did," Alistair said with a smile. Was it like in the movies?" Zora asked. "Even better," Alara said, "because it was real, and we walked out together." That night, they ate dinner at their small kitchen table. Zora had chosen chicken soup and crackers. Alara lit a candle she had been saving for a happy day. Alistair raised his cup of tea. "To justice," he said. Zora raised her half-full glass of juice. "To marshmallows," she cheered. They all laughed, their laughter warm and full of life. Alistair left late that night. The air outside felt cool and calm. He walked past a store window and saw his reflection. The man staring back at him didn't look like a rich CEO anymore. He looked like a father, a friend, a man no longer broken by loss but shaped by love. On his wrist, 2 old bracelets hung, faded but strong, just like him. Spring came slowly that year, like a song starting softly. Central Park filled with gentle colors. The city started waking up after a long winter, and Alistair found himself visiting Alara and Zora more often, not because he felt he had to, but because he wanted to. What started as an act of kindness had grown into something real and deep. He wasn't just helping Alara and Zora anymore, he was becoming part of their family. The small apartment that had once felt temporary now felt alive with love. The kettle whistled every morning, Zora's giggles filled the hallways, and Alistair and Alara found peace just washing dishes together. Alistair even left a blazer in their closet right next to Zora's tiny yellow raincoat. But the world outside was watching. It started with whispers at Alistair's company. A board member asked why the CEO had been canceling meetings. An investor mentioned seeing a woman and a child leaving Alistair's building. It was all innocent talk, but in the business world, curiosity could turn dangerous. Then came the article. Alistair arrived at his office one Monday to see Linnea, his assistant, holding a newspaper. Her face was pale. "It's in the Tribune," she said, handing him the paper. Page 6. The headline was simple but pointed. Power, privilege, and a personal project. Who is the woman in Croft's shadow? The blurry photo showed Alara and Zora walking into Alistair's building. Zora was laughing, Alara carrying groceries. No names, no accusations, but enough for people to start talking. "Find out who leaked this," Alistair said firmly. "It's already spreading," Linnea replied. "The board wants answers. They're calling a meeting." Later that day, Alistair met Alara at a park bench. He had the newspaper folded in his pocket. "I should have seen this coming," he said. Alara read the article, her hands trembling slightly. "Will they fire you?" she asked. Alistair gave a dry laugh. "You don't fire a Croft from Croft Capital, but they'll use this to question me, to make me look weak." Alara folded the paper carefully. "I didn't ask for this kind of attention," she whispered. "I know," Alistair said gently. "I'll protect you both, whatever it takes." She turned away, her lips tight. "I've worked so hard not to be someone's burden." "You're not," he said softly. "You never were." But shadows were already creeping in. That week, Alistair was called to face the board of directors. The conference room felt cold and tense. 12 people sat around a big table, their faces unreadable. Drusilla Thorne, the chairwoman, spoke first. "There are concerns, Alistair," she said. "Concerns about your image, about stability. If you're asking if I used company money to help a friend and her child," Alistair said calmly, "the answer is no." "This is bigger than money," Drusilla said. "This is about perception." Alistair stood up. His voice was steady. "I have never hidden anything. Alara Alvarez saved lives, including mine. Her daughter brings more light to my life than any profit number you could name. If that makes me a risk, maybe you don't understand what true leadership is." The room was silent. Finally, Drusilla spoke again. "We're not trying to punish you, Alistair, but be careful. This company has shareholders, not soulmates." Her words stung. That night, Alistair returned to Alara's apartment. Zora was already asleep under a blanket decorated with planets and stars, a blanket Alistair had helped her pick out. Alara was sitting on the couch, staring at her untouched cup of tea. "I saw the news online," she whispered, "and the comments." Alistair sat beside her. "People will always talk," he said gently. "That doesn't mean they're right. What if it changes things? What if they start digging into my past?" Alara's voice trembled. "What if I lose Zora?" "You won't," Alistair said firmly. "Not while I'm alive." She stood and walked to the window. The city sparkled beyond the glass. "Alistair, I need to ask something hard," she said. "Anything. If this gets worse, if being with us puts your future at risk, your work, your name, would you leave us?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said softly, "I would walk away from all of that before I'd ever walk away from you." Alara's eyes filled with tears, but she turned away before they could fall. Alistair stood behind her, resting his hand gently on her shoulder. "I'm not here out of pity, Alara," he said. "I'm here because you reminded me what it means to care." "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I," he admitted, "but we're still standing." They stood side by side, watching the city lights. Outside, rain fell softly and steadily. Inside, their reflections in the glass showed two people not perfect, but real. The backlash only got worse. 3 days after the first article, another one came out. Blogs and gossip sites posted more photos. Alistair holding Zora's hand, Alara smiling at a winter fair. Headlines shouted cruel things. Croft's secret life, power meets poverty, CEO's dangerous distraction. Alistair's inbox overflowed with complaints. A big client dropped out of a deal. Competitors started rumors. Linnea got calls she never expected. Should we release a public statement? She asked. No, Alistair said firmly. We don't need to defend the truth. We just need to live it. But even he felt the ground beneath him shaking. At Alara's apartment, things grew tense. Alara stopped taking Zora to their favorite cafe. She walked faster in public, wearing sunglasses even on cloudy days. She didn't answer unknown phone calls. Why can't we go to the playground this week? Zora asked one night, hugging her stuffed bunny. It's just a busy time, sweetheart, Alara said softly. Did I do something wrong? Zora asked. Alara's heart broke. Never. You are perfect. Alistair tried to make things better. He brought books, cooked dinners, and stayed late. But even Zora's drawings, once full of bright colors, now showed gray clouds and sad faces. One evening, Alara sat folding laundry. Alistair handed her an envelope. What's this? She asked. A trust, he said. For you and Zora. If anything happens, if things get worse, you'll both be safe. Alara held the envelope carefully, like it was too heavy to touch. Alistair looked at Alara and handed her an envelope. Alara, please take this, he said softly. She frowned and shook her head. I can't. It feels like charity. Alistair smiled gently. It's not charity. It's a partnership. I didn't ask for this. No, he said, but you earned it. The way you've fought, the way you've stayed kind, even when life was hard, you deserve this. Alara's hands trembled as she stared at the envelope. What if this is the beginning of the end? She whispered. Alistair sat beside her. Then let's make it the beginning of something better. Alara looked away, her voice shaking. They're not just attacking you anymore, Alistair. They're coming for me now. People are digging into my past. Someone emailed my old nursing school asking about me. Someone else posted online saying I'm using you. They even wrote bad things about the shelter I stayed in. Alistair clenched his fists. Tell me who's doing this. I'll stop them. Alara shook her head sadly. You can't protect us from everything. I can try, he said firmly. Alara gave him a tired smile. You already have. A few days later, Alistair received an invitation to a big charity event. It was a fancy gala hosted by the New York Children's Foundation. Cameras would be there. Rich people, donors, and reporters would attend. Alistair was supposed to give a speech. When his assistant Linnea handed him the invitation, she raised her eyebrow. They still want you to go? Alistair leaned back in his chair. They think I'll wear a suit, say something nice, and let the gossip about me disappear quietly. Linnea tilted her head. And will you? No, Alistair said. Maybe it's time to do the opposite. That evening, Alistair sat across from Alara at the small apartment table. Zora, Alara's daughter, was asleep nearby, curled up with her favorite picture books. I want you to come with me, Alistair said. Alara blinked. To the gala? He nodded. I'm not a showpiece, Alistair, she said firmly. I know, he replied softly. You're part of my life. I'm done hiding what matters to me. They'll tear me apart, she whispered. Alistair leaned closer. Or maybe they'll finally see what I see. A strong mother who refused to give up. A woman who doesn't need saving, just a chance to be seen. Alara hesitated. What would I even wear? Alistair smiled. Something that makes you feel like the powerful woman you are. Alara let out a surprised laugh. You really think one night can change their minds? No, Alistair said, but it can change the story, and that's enough to start something big. The night of the gala came. It was spring, and a soft rain fell as the car pulled up to a huge glass ballroom on the Hudson River. The city lights sparkled in the distance. Alara stepped out of the car wearing a simple black dress that Alistair had secretly bought for her. It wasn't from a famous brand, but it was beautiful. Her hair was pinned back neatly, and her light makeup made her eyes stand out. Zora stayed home with Linnea, who had insisted on babysitting. Alistair offered his arm to Alara. "You look like the truth," he said with a soft smile. Alara rolled her eyes playfully. "Let's just survive the night." Inside, people turned their heads to look at them. There were curious stares, but also some warm smiles. During dinner, a fancy woman wearing diamond jewelry leaned over to Alara. "And what do you do, dear?" she asked kindly. Alara smiled politely. "I'm studying to finish my nursing degree, and I'm raising the most amazing 7-year-old in the world." The woman blinked and then nodded slowly. "That sounds like the hardest job in this room." When it was time for Alistair to speak, he walked onto the stage. He didn't start with boring numbers or business words. He started with a story. He talked about a little girl who once gave him a bracelet and asked if he needed a hug. He talked about a mother who refused to give up even when she had nothing. He said real wealth wasn't money, but kindness and the courage to stand by someone when it costs you something. Alistair didn't say Alara's name, but he kept looking at her as he spoke. Alara felt something change inside her, not in the crowd, but in her heart. After his speech, Alara found him on the balcony, away from cameras. "You didn't have to say all that," she whispered. "I did," Alistair said, "because it's true." She placed her hand over his heart. "Then let's keep telling the truth." And in that moment, their story grew stronger than any headline. The next day, the internet was buzzing. News articles showed photos of Alara walking beside Alistair, her arm lightly touching his. Some people praised Alistair for standing up for her. Others accused him of using her to fix his image. Some people even tried to dig into Alara's past and wrote mean things about her being a bad mom. Alara deleted her social media and stopped answering calls from unknown numbers. But the comments still reached her. One evening, she found a paper taped to their door. It said, "We don't want your kind here." Alara's chest tightened. She folded the paper and threw it away without a word. When Alistair came home that night, Alara was sitting silently with an untouched cup of tea. Zora was asleep on the couch. "We need to move," she said firmly. "What happened?" Alistair asked, worried. "Nothing," she said at first, but then she told him about the letter. Alistair reached across the table and took her hand. "I can put you somewhere safe, a building with security, somewhere no one can find you." Alara shook her head. "No more hiding, no more running." Alistair looked at her and nodded. "Then we stay, and we fight, together." Alara looked into his eyes. "Are you sure this is worth it?" He didn't blink. "You and Zora are the only thing I've been sure about in years." Tears filled Alara's eyes. "They think I don't belong in your world." "They're wrong," Alistair said. "You make my world worth living in." Alistair's company board called an emergency meeting. The big conference room was full of serious faces. Drusilla Thorne, one of the board members, spoke first. "Alistair, our investors are worried. Your recent choices are affecting the company's image." Alistair stayed calm. "My personal life doesn't affect business." "Maybe not directly," Drusilla said, "but perception matters. Some think your involvement with Miss Alvarez is too personal. They're questioning your judgment as CEO." "Are you saying compassion makes me unfit to lead?" Alistair asked. "We're saying your image is complicated," Drusilla replied carefully. Alistair stood. 4 years ago, I lost my wife and son in a car crash. For years, I lived like a ghost. I made money, but felt nothing. Then I met a little girl who offered me a bracelet and her mother who fought to keep going even when no one helped her. They made me feel alive again, and I will not apologize for that. The room fell silent. I won't leave them just because it makes some people uncomfortable. If that means losing my seat here, so be it. Alistair walked out, his heart pounding, not with fear, but with clarity. That night, he told Alara everything. She panicked. "You can't lose your company because of me." "I'm not losing it," Alistair said calmly. "I'm choosing something better." Alara's eyes filled with tears. "I don't want to be the reason." "You're the reason I'm alive," Alistair interrupted gently. They sat in silence, holding hands. Alara whispered, "What now?" Alistair pulled a folded paper from his pocket. It was Zora's latest drawing. A house, a tree, three stick figures holding hands under a big sun. Big sun. "We keep going," Alistair said softly. Alara smiled. "I can walk with that." 3 days later, the news announced, Alistair Croft steps down as CEO of Croft Capital. The press guessed at the reasons, but Alistair knew the truth. He wasn't stepping down, he was stepping forward. Their apartment became quiet but filled with life. Alistair cooked more. Zora showed him silly dance moves. Alara studied late at night for her nursing exams. One evening, Zora came over holding her old bracelet. "It's getting loose," she said. Alistair knelt down. "That's okay. Things that stay with us for a long time change shape, but they still matter." Zora tied the bracelet back on his wrist. "I still like it." Alistair smiled. "Me too." At that moment, the noise of the world disappeared. All that mattered was family, the family they had built through love and courage. Spring turned into summer. Life wasn't easy, but it felt real. Alistair started writing again, something he hadn't done since college. He wrote about grief, courage, Zora's jokes, and Alara's strength. He didn't miss boardrooms or fancy meetings. Alara passed her nursing exams with honors. She didn't scream or cry. She just smiled, tired but proud. "I did it," she whispered. Alistair hugged her. "You did it for Zora." That week, Zora's school held a play. She was a sunflower. Alistair promised to sit in the front row with flowers for her. When Zora stood on stage wearing a yellow crown, Alistair felt tears in his eyes. Her line was simple but powerful. "Even when storms come, the sun is still behind the clouds." When the curtain closed, she searched the crowd and waved wildly at them. Days later, they walked together in the park. "Life still feels fragile," Alara said. "Maybe it is," Alistair replied. "But fragile doesn't mean weak. It just means we need to take care of it." Alistair shared his plan. "I'm starting a foundation for people like you and Zora, people who are ignored by society. It's called the Bridge Project." Alara smiled. "That's what you said once, that you needed to find a bridge between your old life and your new one." "This time," Alistair said, "I'll be the bridge." One evening, they were walking home when rain suddenly poured down. Alistair covered Zora's head with his jacket while Alara grabbed his hand. They ran together, laughing through the rain instead of running from it. Their home filled with books, plants, and drawings. Alistair turned a storage room into an office filled with photos and Zora's drawings. One day, Alara said softly, "Alistair, it's been home since Zora gave you that bracelet." Alistair looked at the bracelet. "I lost everything, and somehow it led me here." Alara rested her head on his shoulder. "It led you to us." A year later, Alara wore a white coat as she accepted a job at a public clinic. Zora was reading big chapter books and writing stories. Alistair, no longer a CEO, stood proudly beside them. The Bridge Project quietly helped people. There were no big news stories, just real lives changing. On their first holiday as a family, Alistair watched Alara cooking while Zora danced in socks. The smell of food filled the air and laughter echoed through the house. Alistair raised his glass. "To the family we found when we least expected it." Alara raised hers. "To the storms we survived," Zora giggled, raising her juice. "To sunflowers." And in that small kitchen, they finally had something better than fame or fortune. They had peace. They had love. They had home. This is the story of Alistair, Alara, and Zora, a story about how family is not just about blood, but about love, kindness, and courage. It reminds us that even when life is hard, hope grows in small acts of care and connection.